Exactly 300 years ago today, on exactly 300 years ago today, that is on the 22nd of April in 1724, Immanuel Kant was born, who remains one of the most influential and one of the most important thinkers in the history of humanity. And this anniversary exactly 300 years ago, that is on the 22nd of April in 1724, Immanuel Kant was born, who remains one of the most important and most influential thinkers in the history of humanity. To celebrate this anniversary, I am hereby announcing a series of lectures on Kant, on his philosophy, and that is on his whole philosophy. I want to speak about all aspects of his thinking, his theory of knowledge and cognition, his theory of morals, his philosophy of religion, all of it. Now, the question arises why one should listen to these lectures. Wieder nicht. Exactly 300 years ago, that is on the 22nd of April 1724, Immanuel Kant was born, who remains one of the most important and one of the most influential thinkers in the history of humanity. And to celebrate this anniversary, I hereby am announcing a series of lectures on Kant and on Kant's thinking and philosophy. A series of lectures that I want to hold in the next weeks, in the next months, in the rest of this year, and probably into the next year, because I have a lot of lectures planned. I want to cover Kant's whole philosophy, all the aspects of his thinking. So I will talk about his theory of cognition and knowledge, about his moral philosophy, his philosophy of religion, what he says about Aufklärung, what he says about natural science. All the aspects of his thinking I want to cover. Now the question arises, of course, why someone should listen to this series of lectures. And that question can be split up into two questions. One of them being why one should care about Kant at all. The other being, well, even if someone cared about Kant, why should he listen to me talking about Kant specifically and not to anyone else? And I want to start with the second question, because to be sure, there is a lot of material about Kant out there. There are countless books written about Kant. Without knowing any statistics, I would take a guess and say that Kant has probably more books written about himself than most other philosophers have. There are podcasts, there are videos. There's also a lot of material here on YouTube, for example. And I am sure that this 300th birthday of Kant will only bring lots of additional material, new videos, new books. And so the question is, why, out of all these people who have talked about Kant and who continue to talk about Kant, why should I be the one you listen to? Well, I am probably one of the greatest Kant experts to not only be alive currently, but to ever have lived. How do I come to this, I will admit, not exactly modest sounding statement? Well, I have read all of Kant. What does that mean? Kant's works are today collected in what is called the Akademie Textausgabe, so the Academy text edition. Which contains 29 volumes, which in turn are split into 4 groups. The first of those groups, containing 9 volumes, is all the works that Kant himself published during his lifetime. His smaller essays, his books, all of that stuff. That I read, I think, about 6 years ago already. Back then I read those 9 volumes in chronological order to not just know all of Kant, but also to see the development his thoughts underwent. Something that I would always recommend if you really want to get into a thinker more deeply, to read him in chronological order. And even by doing that, by reading the 9 volumes of Kant's published works, I would say even just that already turned me into one of the greater Kant experts. Because you cannot assume that most people have done even that. The regular people studying philosophology certainly haven't done that. I mean, if I were to just go by what I had to read out of Kant's works when I was studying, then I would know pretty much nothing about Kant. The only thing I ever had to read was one book by Kant, that is the groundworks to the metaphysics of morals. And then apart from that, I had to read one essay, like 4 or 5 pages, Kant's famous essay about what is Aufklärung. And then we once read a small excerpt, a few pages of the introduction to Kant's critique of pure reason. And that's it. And some other students might have read a bit more of Kant, many others might have read even less, because the way this whole thing is structured, you maybe visit an introduction lecture when you start studying, where the professor takes you through the history of philosophy briefly, and then you more or less get to pick your own classes. And what you pick depends on what your university even offers. But it might as well depend on what you are interested in, or which professor you prefer, or also just which time a certain class is taking place and which time suits you best. And most students of philosophology will, if at all, have read maybe 1 or 2 works by Kant, and that's it. But even the professors certainly haven't all read the entire 9 volumes of Kant's works. In fact, many of them, probably the majority of them, has probably not even read the 3 critiques of Kant. Those are his main works: the Critique of Pure Reason, the Critique of Practical Reason, and the Critique of the Judgment Power. Those are Kant's main works, the ones that made him so famous and important in the history of philosophy. And even someone who had read just those 3 main works would already know more about Kant than most people do. And once again, you can't assume that every professor has done that. They all have their areas of expertise. They they each have their area of expertise. They they have different areas of expertise. They have different things, different concepts, different thinkers they are interested in and focusing on. And this is not just an opinion. This is a fact. I had many professors who would freely admit that they hadn't read the 3 critiques. So even just by reading those 9 volumes of Kant's published works, that probably turned me into a bigger Kant expert than most professors of philosophology. Not all of them, to be sure. There are Kant experts. There are certainly professors who also have read those 9 volumes, but they are not the majority. But I didn't stop there. During the last year, I wanted to read all of Kant. So what I did is I reread those 9 volumes of published works, but then I went on. There are 4 volumes of letters to and from Kant, and then there are 10 volumes of notes that Kant made, of unfinished works, of drafts, of manuscripts. And then there are 6 volumes of lectures that Kant gave and that we still have the texts of. And as I said, in total that's 29 volumes. So when I'm saying 29 volumes, you shouldn't think of 29 books, because some of these volumes are so thick that they have been separated into 2 or even 3 books, into several parts, each of which may have 500 or 700 pages. So all in all, what I read by Kant was probably close to 20,000 pages. I read that all in the last year. Let me tell you, it was quite a lot of work. But I decided to read at least 100 pages of Kant every day. I didn't succeed every day. There were days when I maybe just read 80 pages or whatever. But then again, there were also days when I read more. I think my record was 220 pages or something like that in a day. And to be sure, it took a lot of time and work. And to be sure, there were some days when I only got finished and got to go to bed at like 2 in the morning. But I did manage to read all of those 29 volumes in the last year. And that is something that I think hasn't been done all too often. So I can claim that every line, every sentence, every word Kant ever wrote down in his life, which is still passed down to us, because to be sure, some things he wrote have been lost, like we don't have his works, his early texts he wrote as a schoolboy, and surely some notes and drafts or some letters have been lost as well. But everything which we do have, down to the last line, I have read. So that would make me an expert on Kant. And what I want to do in this project, this history of philosophy, because I don't want to stop at Kant. I want to do the same thing for other philosophers in the future. What I want to do is I want to really dive deeply into a philosopher. I want to be thorough. I want to have read everything by him. And normally, when you get an introduction to a philosopher, I mean, surely here on YouTube there are many videos that promise to, I don't know, explain the categorical imperative of Kant in 5 minutes or whatever. But usually when you get such introductions in videos, in books, even in lectures at university, you cannot expect that the person teaching you is an expert. In many cases, they may not have read the philosopher at all. In many cases, they themselves may just go off other introductions that they consumed. Like, even at university, I had lectures where the professor would go through the whole history of philosophy from Socrates to our day, and give a brief introduction to each philosopher he deemed important. He definitely didn't read all of them. He probably read some of them, but as for others, he probably went by what he himself once had learned. And in other cases, someone may teach you who actually has read a book or two or three by that philosopher, but you won't very often probably be taught by someone who has read a philosopher in whole. In Kant's case, all those 29 volumes. But I think doing so is very valuable and very important. It certainly helped me getting a deeper understanding of Kant. When you read just certain texts, I'm not saying you can't understand anything. I mean, a good text should stand for itself. A good text should be written in a way that it can be understood without having to read 20 other texts to first get into it. But you won't understand everything about it. You won't understand it as deeply if you haven't read other texts by the same philosopher. I can definitely say that even though I already was a Kant expert, even though I already had read years before all of Kant's published works, I still learned more new things than I was expecting during the last year, when I also went through Kant's notes and lectures and letters, and I still realized that before I had some misunderstandings and some misconceptions about Kant. I still had instances where I came across a note of Kant's and suddenly something clicked. Suddenly that note was referring to some topic that Kant had written about in maybe 5 books that I had already read, but only now with this note did I fully understand the connection between those books, or did I fully understand what Kant was all about in this topic. And that is why I want to be so thorough. There are a lot of misunderstandings and wrong information about not just Kant, about any philosopher. And I want to be as thorough and as complete as possible to not spread wrong or one-sided or incomplete information. I want to have the whole picture before I break it down and give it to you, so that I don't just break down parts and thereby create a distorted picture for you. So what you will find here is not another 5-minute introduction to one specific famous thought of Kant, because there are already many of those, and I don't believe in doing something again, recreating something that already exists in the world, unless you can do it better. Otherwise, it's not justified. Otherwise, you are just creating garbage, waste, something that nobody needs. I believe in always creating something which doesn't already exist. And therefore, what I am creating here is an in-depth look at Kant's complete philosophy, at all the topics, all the themes in his philosophy, the more important and the more famous ones, but also smaller side topics. And one thing that is particularly important to me in doing so is I want to show how they are connected. I want to not just talk about isolated topics. So talk about his theory of cognition in isolation and his theory of morals in isolation, as is usually done when talking about a philosopher, as is usually done even in university, because when you have a class that deals with one book by a philosopher, you are reading that one book, and the students probably don't know more than that one book. And even if the professor maybe knows a bit more, even if he has read a few more books by that philosopher, you are mainly focusing on the thoughts in this book, but you never really get talked the bigger picture. You never really get talked what that philosopher was about in total. And in Kant's case, he was a systematic thinker like almost no other. And there are a lot of parallels, very interesting parallels, between the different topics of his philosophy. So there are connections between his theory of cognition and his theory of morals, or there are very close parallels between his political philosophy and his philosophy of religion. And I want to point those out to you. I want to give one example, and I purposefully want to give one example by picking out a minor, not as important thing. When I go into the actual lectures, there will be more important examples coming up. But one example would be that Kant, in some lectures on morality and some anthropological reflections, Kant addresses friendship. Now, this is not something super important, super integral to Kant's whole philosophy, but it is something he talks about. He talks about what is friendship, and he says there are 3 types of friendship. The first being like a sort of comradeship between people who need each other, who have common interests. So, for example, in a more primitive society, 2 hunters who go hunting together, and they can like each other, and they can be helpful for each other, and they can maybe even get into danger and risk their lives for one another, but still that friendship is mostly based on a common interest. And if their lives changed, if their interests shifted, and they wouldn't be useful for each other, then maybe they would drift apart. The second type is more of an aesthetical friendship. It's a friendship based on enjoying the other's company. based on maybe enjoying conversations with the other person, enjoying games with that other person, maybe having the same tastes in arts and so on. So it is a friendship where the friends don't need each other to survive, but they provide entertainment and pleasure for another. And then the third type is a moral friendship. So here the friendship is based on sharing the same worldviews, the same sentiments, of thinking in the same ways. Kant says this is mainly about having the same moral and religious principles and views. And therefore the friends are able to really open up to each other, to really understand each other, and to really agree on a deep level. So, those are the three types of friendship Kant identifies. And then there are other works of Kant, anthropological works, where he talks about human nature. It's actually one central question to philosophy according to Kant. What is the human? And in those works, Kant says humans have three natures. One, we are animals, like other animals, with physical, with animalistic, with sensual needs. Two, we are still animals, and therefore still sensual, but we are intellectual animals. We are thinking animals, which also, for example, makes us social creatures. And third, we are spiritual beings. We are rational beings. We have reason, and in that way we are not kin to the animals, we are kin to the spirits, to angels and things like that if they existed. And therefore we are moral creatures, which is not to say that we actually always are moral, we obviously aren't, but we are creatures who can be moral and who have a moral duty. And when you compare these, then it becomes very obvious that those three types of friendship Kant talks about align perfectly with these three human natures. But you read about these in completely different works, on completely different topics. And Kant himself doesn't mention that there's a connection. Like, he doesn't point out, oh yeah, these are the three types of friendship, and I base those on the three human natures that I talk about in this other essay, so look there if you want to know more. You have to pick that up yourself. And this goes on. I could continue this example. For example, in yet other works, Kant talks about the types of lust, the types of enjoyment that we as humans can have. And again, he says there is physical, sensual pleasure. Then there is something like beauty, which of course is based in sensuality on one hand. I mean, I find something beautiful which I see, for example. But which is more of an intellectual enjoyment still. And then third, there is a moral enjoyment. So when I am content with something because I judge it to be morally good, to be the way it should be. And once again, it's pretty obvious that these align with the three human natures. And now we already have three different things that are connected to one another, but that you will find in three different works of Kant, which works don't refer to one another. So as a normal person, even a normal professor reading Kant, just reading one work or then another work, you probably won't pick up on this. Even if you did read those specific three works where you will find the human nature, the friendship, the enjoyment, you may not pick up on it because it's not necessarily something very prominent and central. It's probably buried in in hundreds of pages of other stuff. And only, so for example, I already knew about these three human natures according to Kant, and also about these three types of enjoyment, and still before the last year I didn't make that connection. Only by reading so much of Kant and by him repeating certain things, certain thoughts of his in various works and various notes and lectures and letters, and only by reading maybe the same thought of Kant for 5 or 6 times, and then another thought also for 5 or 6 times, only then did it click for me and did I make the connection. And now I want to give you those connections so that for you this would be easier. It's a bit like because I want to help those who want to read Kant for themselves, but you probably don't want to read all those 29 volumes like I did. You probably just want to read 1 or 2 specific texts. Well, then I will help you picking up certain things, certain hints in those texts that you otherwise wouldn't be able to pick up without having read all that other stuff. It's a bit like if you had a puzzle with thousands of pieces. But before you were shown the picture of what the completed puzzle would look like, then it would get a lot easier to connect the pieces. And I want to show you that picture basically. Or to use another allegory, imagine you are reading a crime novel, a detective novel, and I was to tell you beforehand who the murderer is. You would then probably be able to pick up on certain hints, on certain clues the author is giving right from the start. You would probably be able to tell right from the start which clue is a red herring leading nowhere and which clue actually is pointing out the murderer. And to be sure, when reading a detective novel, you probably wouldn't want me to spoil it for you like that. But in this case, it's not just one novel, it's more like 29 volumes, and it's more like in none of these volumes is it ever explicitly stated who is the murderer, but rather there are clues spread throughout all of these 29 volumes, and you would have to read all of them and put the clues together yourself to find it out. And in order for you not having to do that work, I will give you the basic structure of Kant's system, so that now when you read just one work of Kant's and you come across, for example, the number 3, Kant splitting something into 3, you can pick up on that and think for yourself whether this might be connected to the 3 human natures that Kant defines in another place. And also, when one gets deeper into Kant, one may find that a lot of the things that Kant writes can maybe be understood to a certain degree. If you just read them in isolation, but they are so very deeply connected with other parts of his philosophy that you only get the full understanding when you have the whole picture. Just one more example to also explain what I mean by this. One of Kant's most famous texts is his essay on what is Aufklärung. And famously he says there that to be aufklärt, you should use your own intellect for yourself, and that people often don't do this out of laziness. And I mean, that sounds plausible enough, and I guess anyone can understand something by hearing use your own intellect, and people are not doing that because they are too lazy. But when you get deeper into Kant, you realize that the word intellect has a specific meaning for Kant. It is in fact for him spread into 3 parts. One being the intellect in the closer sense, one being the power of judgment, and one being reason. And therefore, when Kant is saying use your own intellect, he's actually saying use your own intellect in the closer sense, use your own power of judgment, use your own reason. And what exactly does that mean? Well, Kant actually gives principles, gives maxims for the right use of those 3 faculties. But he doesn't do so in his essay on Aufklärung. He does so in completely different works. And likewise, this laziness. If you read certain other works on Kant, if you read his works about natural philosophy, you might pick up on the fact that Kant says everything in nature is lazy, so to speak. Matter itself is defined by its inertia. no stone will start rolling away on its own unless you kick it. So that means that we have to be lazy, and we will stay lazy insofar as we are beings of nature, insofar as we are matter, insofar as we are animals. And therefore, Aufklärung means we have to rise above our nature. We have to be more than just nature. We have to be rational. But what does that mean to Kant? Well, it means not following simply the law of nature, the law of our desires, but following the law we gave ourselves, and that is the moral law. So we find that Aufklärung is closely connected to morality. If, by the way, if this was too fast or too complicated for you, don't worry. Here at this point, it's just to give an example. I will go more into this in future lectures. But here I just want to point out that even something like a small 5-page essay that Kant published in some journal, you can surely understand it to a degree. You can surely get something out of it if you only read that essay. But if you have read all of Kant, you will understand much more. You will see how it is connected to his theory of the intellect, how it is connected to his thoughts on natural science, how it is connected to his philosophy of morality. And all of that is something I want to point out for you here. However, no matter how much I know about Kant, what I tell you will still be second-hand knowledge, not first-hand knowledge. So I do encourage you to read Kant for yourself if you're interested. Nothing, not the best lecture in the world, can replace reading a philosopher for yourself. However, you probably don't want to read all these 29 volumes for yourself, but just specific texts on specific topics. And I want to help you in that too. Maybe you will listen to all of my lectures, but then you will find something specific, like maybe Kant's political theories or his philosophy of history. Maybe you will find that particularly interesting, and you will want to read about that specifically for yourself. Well, under each lecture, I will give recommendations which texts of Kant are talking about the topic of that lecture. If I can, I will also provide links because many of these texts are online. Unfortunately, I can't always promise that those texts will be available in English. To be sure, Kant's main works, they have all been translated, but as for his drafts and notes and letters and lectures, many of those are unfortunately only available in German. That goes also for my own text, because I did all this work reading all of Kant last year, not just in preparation for these lectures, but I actually wrote a book, or rather I tried to write one book, but I found there was so much content that it got a little more than that. It ended up being like about 1,400 pages, close to 700,000 words. So it's actually being split into several books. I already have a publisher. The book will come out in some month. The first book will be about Kant's philosophy of religion, but there will also be books on the other parts of Kant's philosophy, but that's in German. And seeing how this is my first book I ever publish, I can't make any promises that this will be translated. It will first have to find some readers in German, and then maybe down the line in some years we can see how things go. But here in these lectures I want to give more or less the same content as I'm giving in my books. And one more reason why I would recommend you listening to me is that I have quite a bit of experience in explaining philosophers. I have done that. I have talked in one way or another for, well, at least a decade, and not in a strictly academic setting, not at university, but I've actually spent a lot of time here where I live teaching school students, teaching teenagers, teaching students mostly from an immigrant background, who don't come from highly educated families. And that, I would say, has given me a lot of training and experience in explaining philosophy, explaining even deeper and more complex thoughts in a manner that a lay person, a non-expert, can understand it, illustrating it with examples, and making it more accessible. And this is what I try to offer here too. And lastly, all I do is about Aufklärung. So what I want to do here is not just give dry lectures on Kant, so that the empty space in your head can be filled with historical knowledge about what Kant said, but I want to apply Kant to life. I want to talk mainly about what in Kant's thoughts can help us with our Aufklärung, can deepen our Aufklärung, can teach us how to think and to live. So that was the first question. So with the first question now out of the way, why you should listen to me specifically, I want to also address the second question, why you should care about Kant. I won't talk about it in length because I assume if you have listened till this point, you probably have some interest in Kant. But I want to say this much. Kant is, I would say, a thinker of Kant is, I would say, a thinker of transition. That is, he lived and thought at the end of one period and at the beginning of another period. You can see that even in his language. For a long time, the language of scholarship and of science used to be Latin. And the most important German philosopher before Kant, that was Leibniz, even though he was a German, he didn't leave us German works. He wrote in Latin and in some French. Then after Leibniz, the most influential German thinker in the 18th century was the now mostly forgotten Wolff. And Wolff already published German works, but he also published in Latin. And then Kant, he wrote all of his stuff in German. But he still learned Latin at school, and he still did write good, fluent Latin. And there are a small number of smaller works that he did write in Latin. Those were just works he needed to write for his academic career, because back then it was already common to write and publish in German. But if you wanted to become a doctor, for example, your dissertation, it still had to be in Latin. So there are very few, very short works in Latin by Kant, and he still has the habit of when he writes in German and he is introducing an important term, then he puts a Latin translation in brackets behind it in the German text. And after him, philosophers have written completely in German. That is the German philosophers, of course. So even the next generation, people like Fichte, Schelling, Hegel, they wrote in German. So Fichte, who is the most important student disciple of Kant and who completed and radicalized Kant's philosophy, he too had Latin in school. He certainly was capable of writing in it, but still he doesn't even, like Kant did, give Latin translations for his important terms. And that's just if we look at the language. But this and that's just if we look at the language, but also if we look at other things. For example, I would also say that Kant is the last philosopher who really deals with all aspects of thinking and all aspects of philosophy. So Kant has talked about our cognition, about morality, about law and politics, about beauty and arts, about natural science, and he wasn't the first to do so. Leibniz before him also covered various topics with his thought, and so did an ancient thinker like Aristotle. But he was more or less the last to do so. Again, if we just look at the next generation of thinkers in Germany, we find that someone like Fichte has very deep speculative theoretical philosophy. He also has moral philosophy, which is very important to him, philosophy of religion, philosophy of the state and politics. But he doesn't say much about natural science anymore, which Kant was very interested in. And he also has only a few small remarks about art or about beauty. Not a whole work on it, not a whole theory on it like Kant did. And then the next important thinker, more or less at the same time, Schelling, well, he may talk about nature and try to form a philosophy of nature, and he may also care a lot about aesthetical questions such as beauty and art. But then again, he doesn't, like Fichte, go deep into the philosophy of law, of justice, of the state, which Kant did talk about. So, once again, he is sort of the last to not focus on specific topics while probably neglecting others, but who is broader in his approach. And this place of transition makes Kant, among other things, very important in the history of philosophy. And I would say that if you want to study philosophy systematically, you should probably start out with Kant. And if you want to read only 2 or 3 philosophers in your life more completely, so like not just pick 1 or 2 books by them to read, but read all of their works, at least their published works, probably not with the notes and the letters like me, but at least the published works, then Kant should be one of those 3. Now, of course, you don't have to study philosophy systematically. Not everyone has this path in life, like me, and that's perfectly fine. You probably have your own path, and it might be fine to either not deal with philosophy at all, or if you deal with it, to just read one work here and one work there. But if you want to study philosophy more systematically, and I find it very unfortunate that this is not really done. Not at universities either. Like I described before, you probably have a class on this philosopher and one on this and one on this work and one on that work, but the whole thing is not really organized in a systematic way. But if you want to study philosophy systematically, then I am convicted you should start with Kant. Maybe as an introduction, you could first read some smaller, some easier works by a few other philosophers, especially by ancient ones, but then your systematic study should start with Kant. Why is that? Well, the thinkers after Kant, the thinkers that came in the last 200 years, at least those among them that matter at all and that can be taken seriously at all, they, in one way or another, respond to answer to expand on Kant. So if you want to read and understand any of the thinkers of the last 200 years that matter in the history of philosophy, you should probably read Kant first. What though about the thinkers that came in the more than 2000 years before Kant? Well, they obviously didn't base their thinking on Kant, um, but I still think it is helpful to first study Kant before trying to study any of them. Um, because he is so systematic and because he is so thoroughly criticized philosophy and the very basis of philosophy, and therefore he is helpful in understanding them, understanding what they wanted, what they tried to do, where they succeeded, where they failed, and why. And he's helpful in understanding them better than they understood themselves. Which, by the way, is something that Kant himself says. He says this about Leibniz specifically. But he also makes it a general statement. He says it is possible to, at a later point, probably in retrospect, understand an author better than he understood himself. And I think that for almost any author, Kant is an important key to doing just that. To make a comparison, imagine in medicine. Imagine all the philosophers before Kant were physicians who tried curing various illnesses. And through trial and error, through this and that opinion and theory, they came up with various remedies and medicines. And I am not saying that all the philosophy that came before Kant doesn't matter, or that it's all worthless, or that we don't need it since we have Kant now. Not at all. I think there are very, very valuable lessons to be found in many previous philosophers. However, those physicians, they would have found some actual remedies which actually work, but they may also have found some pseudo remedies which don't work, some superstitious means to cure illnesses which either don't do anything or which even are harmful. And even when it comes to the remedies that do work, that those ancient physicians might have found, they can't probably explain why they work. They probably try to make up various theories about it, like the theory of the four humors that was so prominent for such a long time in medicine. But they don't actually know why those remedies work. And now imagine one guy came along and and he tried a different approach, and he was the first one to do a chemical analysis of various substances and to to split them into their parts, into their components. And he was the first one to really figure out which component has which effect on the body. So then I would say your study of medicine should start with him and with his theory of chemical analysis. Because if after you went back and studied the works of the previous physicians, through his chemical analysis, you could figure out which of their suggested remedies will work and which won't. And you could even explain why they work or why they don't work. And so therefore, those previous physicians might actually have found some very good remedies. And they might have found some remedies that this guy who came up with the chemical analysis didn't know about. But still, it is his theory that should be the basis of your studying to make it more systematic and more scientific. So I very, very firmly am convinced that Kant should be the fundament of philosophy and of the study of philosophy. And I want to make very clear that I am not a dogmatic, blind Kantian. In fact, I do have disagreements with Kant, and I do have things to criticize in Kant, and I will do so in the coming lectures at the appropriate points. But I still think you should start from him. And I also want to make clear that I don't think philosophy is finished with him. Because even where he was correct, he didn't go all the way to the end. He didn't say everything there was to say. When you build a house, you don't stop with the fundament. You need walls, you need a roof, or else it will get quite wet once it rains. But you should start with the fundament, or else the walls you try to erect, the roof you try to build, will not have anything to stand on, anything that will hold them up. So that is why I suggest diving deeper into Kant. Now, I am nearing the completion of this announcement, but I don't want to close without first addressing two more things. The first is the topic or the issue of comments. It is now very much common practice that you can comment pretty much anywhere in the internet. So under videos on YouTube and on podcasts and under newspaper articles online, you can leave your comments. And God knows that unfortunately many people do just that. And I am no friend of this culture of commenting and blabbering and opining that we have created. I believe that the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear something, when you hear someone talk about philosophy, for example, the first thing that comes to your mind, whether it's agreement or disagreement, is pretty much worthless. Because it was already in your mind before you hear these new thoughts. And you agreeing or disagreeing means nothing else but you saying, well, this is what I already thought, or this is something that I haven't thought so far. But you should actually take your time to think this new thought through, to let it affect you. The ancient Pythagoreans had this practice where the new learners, the apprentices, the novices, had to be silent for 5 years and had to first learn before they were commenting or asking their questions. And I think there's a lot of value in first giving yourself time to digest something and to consider something before blurting out the very first thing that comes to your mind when you heard it without probably having properly understood it yet. And nowadays, when you turn off the comments, you might often get accused of censorship and being against free speech. But the thing is, I'm not thereby being against free speech. I mean, you are free to answer and reply to what I say in your own essays that you publish somewhere on a blog or whatever, or in a response video you create. And I wouldn't forbid this even if I could. So if I am turning off comments, so if I'm turning off comments, that's not an attack on free speech. You can still speak elsewhere. That's just me not seeing why I should give a platform to So if I'm turning off comments, that's not an attack on free speech. You can still speak freely elsewhere. That's just me not seeing why I myself should give a platform to every unqualified comment. I mean, we just take this so much for granted today that we can comment everything and anything. But just think about for a second how absurd it would be to ask for this when it comes to a book, for example. When you read a book, like Kant's Critique of Pure Reason, for example, you can't directly comment it. You can't scribble your comment. You can't scribble, oh, that's all nonsense, on the last page. Or, I mean, you can, but nobody is going to read it but yourself. Now imagine how absurd it would be to expect that this comment, this is all nonsense, now has to be printed together with the actual book, together with the actual text by Kant in the next edition. So that this comment gets a special platform, so that anyone who now buys and reads this book will now also get this comment shoved into his face. How absurd would that be? And how absurd would it be to claim the publisher who is not doing this is censoring and attacking free speech? So I thought about it for a while, whether I should allow comments or not under these lectures, and I decided that I will not turn the comments off altogether, but I will make it so that I first have to look at each specific comment and allow it before it's published here. Because I do want to allow certain kinds of comments, and I would be happy to receive those. I invite you to write comments if either they contain questions, because maybe I left something important out, or maybe I wasn't able to make myself completely clear. So if you have questions left, feel free to ask them, and I will try to respond to them. Even if I don't respond directly in the comments, then maybe I will try to respond to them in a future video and to clear things up. Also, if you have corrections, feel free to post them, because even with having read all of these volumes by Kant, that still doesn't mean that I'm above error. So, and as I said before, I don't want to spread errors. So if I do, I would be very happy to be corrected. And if I'm shown that I'm wrong, then I will correct myself. So you are absolutely welcome to do that. And also, if you have additional things to add, additional thoughts, additional details that you want to add or that you want to discuss, then feel welcome once again to comment that. However, what I ask you to not post, and I'm sure some people will still do it, but I have no intention to let you do it, so you might as well not waste your and my time. What I ask you to not post is mere disagreement or mere agreement. I want to stress here, because surely some people will accuse me of censoring criticism. Well, I will censor criticism, so to speak, but I will also censor applause just as much. If all you have to say is how wrong I am and how stupid I am, and I'm sure some people will want to say that. I mean, this is the internet. It's hard to say anything meaningful on here without receiving some amount of hate. But also, if all you want to say is how amazing I am and how grateful I am and how grateful you are for these lectures, then let me point you at my website where you will find a contact email. Because this is something, whether it's hate mail or whether it's love mail, that you can tell me in private. And I mean, feel welcome to do so. I would, of course, enjoy hearing that you liked the series and that you took something away from it. I would be happy about receiving some applause. But I don't think it belongs here into the comments if you have nothing else to say. Treat these lectures, even though they are online, treat them as you might treat an offline university lecture. Imagine you are sitting here in the lecture hall with 400 students listening to a professor, and at the end he gives you time to raise your hands and ask questions or comment or whatever. Ask yourself before you want to comment here, is this something that I would raise my hand to say in a room with 400 people? And if it's a question, if it's a comment concerning the content, then you probably would. But would you raise your hand in this setting just to tell the professor that he sucks, or just to tell the professor that he's amazing? I mean, you would probably write him an email or talk to him face to face, but just the two of you after the lecture, but you don't have to put that in front of everyone. Because it's just between you and the professor. It doesn't concern all the others. So why take up their time with it? I think that today, and this is something I will also address at a later point because it is connected to one part of Kant's talks, I think that today we have no real concept of the public space, and we take speaking publicly not seriously enough. And I want to do my part to change this. So I ask you, before you comment, is what I'm going to say something that only concerns him? Then you can tell me in private. Or is it something that concerns others and is of interest to others as well? I want you to really be mindful of the fact that your comment is there not just for me, but for the whole world to see. So ask yourself, is this really something that the world needs to see before you comment? Lastly, I want to point out that you can support me. Here via YouTube and also via my website. So I will point out that my website unfortunately is only in German. So you won't, if you don't speak German, you won't understand much. But you can also find the links here on YouTube. You can find links to my PayPal, to my Patreon, and to my Coffee. And via PayPal and Coffee, you can give me a one-time payment if you want. And via Patreon and also Coffee, and I guess also via PayPal actually, it is also possible to give me a monthly donation. And if you do that via Patreon and via Coffee, you can actually be a member there and get some small rewards as a thank you. And I don't want to, like some other YouTubers might be doing, I don't want to address this after each and every single video. I don't want to annoy you with constantly begging you for your money. I will do this here at the start of this lecture once. I might do it again at the very end of the lecture. Apart from that, the links will be there, and I mean, I'm all about Aufklärung. I want people's freedom and independence. So I think it is a decision for each and every one, an individual decision for each and every one of my listeners, and I don't have to constantly shove this in your face. You are independent enough, hopefully. You are adult enough, hopefully, to figure out for yourselves that the possibility is there, that those links are there, and you either do decide to support me or you don't. I don't want to force you to anything. I mean, it's not like I could anyways. But here, this one time, I do want to ask you to consider supporting me. And it can be with a bigger donation, it can be with a membership and a monthly donation, but even if you just have $5 to give me once, so you're basically just buying me a coffee or whatever, I would still be very grateful for that. And even small donations are helpful. I mean, even if just 100 people each decide to give me $1 per month, that is still an additional $100 per month, which is not nothing. And I would ask you to consider this, firstly, because, as I think has already been clear in this video, I put a lot of work into this, and I was very thorough, and I was very conscientious in what I did. As I already explained, over the past year, or a bit over a year, I read 29 volumes. I read about 20,000 pages of Kant, and I also wrote about this extensively, writing close to 700,000 words, I think, on Kant. And then now I'm recording these videos here, and I mean, as this lecture is going on, you will see how long it will be. I am giving this lecture both in English and in German, so I'm basically recording each video twice. So if the video is like 1 hour 30 long, that means I sat here for 3 hours in 1 week to record those 2 videos, and that's not even counting the time it took to cut the videos. So there's a lot of time going into this, and if you take anything away from this, if you find what I'm doing helpful and valuable in any way, you maybe might consider what it is worth to you, if you want to compensate me for all that work. I mean, I will probably never be properly paid for this work. I don't expect my book, when it's coming out, to make me a billionaire or something. And at this point, it's pretty much impossible to say how many hours I invested into my work on Kant. And even if for all those hours I got just minimum wage, it would be so much that I would need to be given. It's not realistic that I will ever receive that much money from it, which is okay. Obviously, this is not the kind of work you're doing for the money. This is the kind of work you're doing because you believe in it. But still, maybe you find it worth giving me something back for it. What I'm doing here is, well, I could say I'm giving you basically a free well, I could say I'm basically giving you an entirely free university class on Kant, on philosophy, but at the risk of sounding full of myself, that would be a gross understatement. This, what I am going to give you here, is much more than you will find at any university, and is much more than you could buy for money anywhere. And I am giving it for free. And I will continue to do so in the future. It is very important to me for education, for Aufklärung, for knowledge to be free for anyone and accessible for anyone. I don't plan to monetize my videos on YouTube. I don't plan to produce exclusive content that only my patrons on Patreon will see. I want to freely give this to anyone, but I will be very glad and grateful if someone still wants to give me something in return. But also consider the money you might give me not just to be a thanks and a small compensation for the work I did so far. Consider it an investment into the future, because as I mentioned before, while my work on Kant is basically done, apart from recording all those videos, which is still going to be a lot of work, I want to make it my life's project to also talk about other philosophers like that. Now, I don't know how far I will get with this. I will certainly not be able to create a complete history of philosophy if I'm going to only write about a philosopher and talk about a philosopher once I have read him completely. I mean, this took me a whole year for Kant. Even if I kept this up all my life, and that's maybe not going to happen. But even then, I could only cover 50 philosophers. But even so, I want to keep doing this ambitious project, and we will see how far I get. And so, if you are interested in having me cover other philosophers in the same depth, then you also might consider giving me something for it, because, well, it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort, and the more time I have to spend earning my income in some other way, because I too need to pay my rent and need to eat something, the less time I have to read philosophers and record lectures on it. While the more I might in the future make through a platform like Patreon or like Coffee. Coffee would probably be better, because there all the money is going directly to me, and you are not having to pay additional fees for the platform like you have on Patreon. But I leave that up to you in which way you prefer to support me. The more I make this way, the more time I will have to study other philosophers and to give you all the more and all the sooner content about other philosophers. But with that, let me close this announcement, and I am looking forward to having some of you hopefully watch me and take away something from this. Take away something from listening. Have some of you hopefully become more aufklärt by listening to what I have to say about Kant. I plan to release a new video every week, each Saturday, starting with next Saturday, and I hope that you will find something of value, something enriching in those lectures.